Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our short videos that are on Dr. Dave Regis's opening repertoire, as he recommends for beginner players, junior players, and even for experienced old veterans, grizzled war horses like my good self, who want to try something a bit new. And last episode, we were looking at the Giuoco Piano. So these moves here. This is the traditional Giuoco Piano opening. It says Italian game, and there's the Giuoco Piano, and white playing c3 with the idea of d4. And what we saw is that, as with most openings, and the computer's sort of proving it, if white plays very, very sensibly and does nothing silly, white will come out of the opening with a tiny plus. They just do because they have the first move. But what we've also seen in all of the first sort of 5 or 6 videos in this playlist is that if either side does anything a bit silly, then in these openings, the pawn openings with the bishop pointing at the king and the knight ready to join in, and by the way, the same happening, albeit a move slower for black, if either side sort of messes up, you can get crushed pretty quickly. So it's a little bit more risky than the sort of setup openings I play, where I play d4 first move up. But it's cool. It's a different style of play. So let's pick up the next 5 games. And in this game, we get what's called a transposition. Now, the players here, this game that Dr. Dave has found, and I've said before, God knows where he finds these games, but this is from an under-12s tournament in 1995 in Disneyland, Paris. And he even knows that it's round 6 of this tournament. I mean, for heaven's sake, where do you find this stuff, Dave? Anyway, the white is a young player called Eladnani. Black is a player called Maximov. And they had plenty of time to go out on the rides at Disneyland because the game ended in 9 moves. And it's also an example of something called transposition. And transposition is where you end up in one opening via a weird move order. So you move all the pieces in a different order, but end up where you are. So if you remember, we said the Giuoco Piano was this. So the pawn, then the knight, then the knight. But there's a very basic transposition in this game, and black plays this first, known as the Nimzovich defense, which, by the way, white should really play d4 as the best move to and just claim the center. But white doesn't in our game, here and here. And suddenly we're back to, by transposition, we're back to our Giuoco Piano. And c3, as usual, not planning d5, so that's cheating, planning d4. So knight to f6 is the normal move. I'll just turn the lines off because we don't want anything to be given away. And white plays d4, as you would, it's the whole point of the opening. He takes d4, and now white plays here. So in previous games, we've seen pawn takes, bishop here, knight to here, and the various goings on from what's called the Muller attack. But here white plays e5, and it's threatening to take a knight. So it's a pretty direct threat. Black can't really play knight takes because the pawn's defended. So what can black do? Well, black can move the knight, or we can try this. And this defends the knight in a weird way because this pawn is now pinned. If the pawn takes the knight, queen takes king is rather strong. So pawn takes knight's actually an illegal move. And the computer says this is actually a bit better for white. This is a slight mistake, but it's an understandable mistake. It's very tempting to just pin the pawn. Okay. So white castle, white just breaks the pin, and black now moves the knight, gets the knight out of the way. We'll put the analysis on in a minute. I explain why black could or couldn't just take the pawn, but knight to e4 is played. Now, in Dr. Dave's book, he writes here, black's knight parachutes in, no strings attached. And what he means is, who's defending this? Nothing's defending it. It's completely undefended. And loose pieces have a tendency to get taken and lost. Loose pieces, so ones that aren't defended adequately. So let's see what happens in the game. Takes with a threat. Okay, well, that's a pretty good move. And you can see from the bar that white is absolutely doing well. The bishop has to move, really, because it's attacked. So bishop to b4. And then bishop to d5. What? Well, what's going on here? Well, Where exactly are we going to put this? See, the bishop attacks the knight. Bishops move backwards. And what are we going to do with this knight? Where does it go? There's no way to save it. For example, if you put the knight here, pawn takes. If you put the knight here, pawn takes. And remember, yeah, losing a piece for a pawn at junior beginner level it's annoying, but it's not the end of the game. But at a decent level, you've just resigned if you lose a piece. If the knight goes here, pawn takes. If the knight goes here, and we're going full octopus here, the knight's got all 8 moves, pawn takes. If the knight goes here, well, knight takes, bishop takes, or queen takes. It's not a good square. If the knight goes here, rook takes. If the knight goes here, everything takes. And look at all these arrows. If the knight goes here, well, bishop takes, which is also threatening the queen, and the knight defends that square. So look at that for a series of arrows. This knight has 8 possible moves, and not a single one of them will save it. And the best option, I was just going to say, is to protect it with a pawn, but it really isn't going to get you anywhere in particular. So big advantage to white. I wonder what happens if you play the en passant move. Oh, yes, of course, the knight would take back. Yeah, okay. So what's the computer recommending? Well, a3, look at this, +4. White is just doing really, really well here. Bishop back. And queen to a4, oh dear, it's just horrid. The point here is the bishop's got to keep retreating because it's only protected by the knight. So if you don't do anything, bishop takes knight and queen takes bishop. So bishop goes back. And this position is just horrible. It's just a horrible position for black. White's dominating the board. So, okay, that was the end of the game. Black resigned. I think probably black should have played f5 and fought on at junior level and tried to hold the pawn that way. But it's not fun times to be on the end of this kind of position. So that's the first game from Dr. Dave today. They're always very miniature games in this book, by the way. They're just to give you a flavour of how the openings might go. So obviously, if you really want to study it in detail, then you go and get a specific book just on, excuse me, swallow my breath, just on the Giuoco Piano. And there'll be an awful lot of very thick books just on the one opening. This is just to give you a flavour. Okay, so our next game here is 12 moves, I think. Yep, 12 moves. So let's see. So we have e4 and we have e5. And knight to f3, knight to f6. And for anyone who hasn't watched before, this knight attacks here. So this one defends, and both knights are being moved towards the center of the board. So that's the point of openings. Develop your pieces and try to gain central control, either by putting pieces in the center or by controlling it from a distance. So where are we? So bishop c4, bishop c5, of course, because it's the Giuoco Piano. What else? And c3 and knight f6 is the typical move. And we have d4 takes, c takes d4. And this time the bishop retreats. So we've seen it go here. Now we're going to see the bishop just drop backwards. Excuse me. The problem with that, of course, is you've just given white this amazing center. 2 pawns just dominating all the space in the middle of the board. And whilst it's not the end of the game by any means, that's why the computer is saying it thinks plus 1.3, 1.4 here, because white's got all of this extra space and is going to start advancing these pawns any minute. And indeed, the next move is e5. Ping! So we're attacking the knight. So in the last game, we saw queen here to pin the pawn. In this game, black tries knight to g4. Well, okay, fair enough. White carries on with what's called an initiative. So just making moves that attack the enemy pieces. So the enemy now has no time to do what they want to do. Instead, they've got to respond. So knight back to h6. White doesn't play the very tempting bishop takes knight to ruin the enemy pawn formation, which must be very tempting, but instead just pushes another pawn forward with gain of time. Look at this center. I suppose the only thing white would have to be careful of is the king is still in the middle, but I mean, this is fantastic stuff. Okay, so this knight's got to go somewhere. So, I mean, you can try going here, but then we run into this move, h3, and we end up with both knights just looking ridiculous on the edge of the board. I guess that's probably not pretty. So knight to e7. And Dr. Dave's comment in the book here, black's pieces have been pushed to the edge. White can use black's lack of space to win material. So to win material just means gain pieces. So you'll win a knight or you'll win a rook for a pawn or whatever. So gain material. And let's see how will this move. And once again, it's done with tempo. It's done with a threat. So we're threatening pawn takes knight. So it's an initiative, as we call it in chess. It's limiting black's possible replies. The knight has to escape. And here we go with another threat. The bishop's threatening the queen. And queen takes bishop, no good, because the bishop has some support. So what on earth are you going to do? You can't put the knight back in the way because pawn takes. So black plays f6 and white plays e takes f6. And now there's just big problems. Look at all the threats. If pawn takes, then bishop takes knight because this won't any longer be here. So that just straight wins a piece. And I say if what else? I mean, I was going to say if this, if that, but what is there actually that black can do? There is nothing. I mean, have a look at the position, and that's why the computer here is saying +9 to white. But of course, it doesn't have to go like this. And this is something I always stress in these openings, is I'm going to put the lines back. If we go back here, so white's just played pawn takes, the computer's saying it's basically dead level. And it recommends bishop to b4. Look at the difference. Bishop going back to b6 is already +1 and a bit for white. Bishop to b4, basically level. So it really is a question in these openings of knowing your stuff, of playing lots of games in it, doing a bit of study, and not making these mistakes. So straight away, bishop b6 looks all right. Get away from the attack. Why not? But look at that. The computer's saying no. That's quite an unpleasant advantage for white, and it's for the reasons that I outlined. That you just can't be giving this kind of central control to your opponent. Oh, I just got rid of the arrows, but you get the idea. Yeah, white dominating the center of the board here. So, okay, let's get a new analysis board. And we've got another game with the Giuoco Piano, of course. And this time we're back to the Muller Attack, which is from the last video, but it's a 20 move game this time. So e4. e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4, bishop to c5. You'll recognize all of this by now. It's classic chess book theory, i.e. it's been played hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. In fact, forget that. It's been played tens of thousands of times, at least, probably hundreds of thousands, probably millions. It's such a common opening. And of course, move 5, d4. It's the whole point of playing this is to support d4. So there it is. And what do we get? Well, the correct and best move for black is to take the pawn. Oh, turn the lines off. We try not to use those until we're analyzing at the end. And pawn takes. And this time black plays the correct move, which is bishop to b4. And the only good response for white is really knight to c3. So that's fine. And knight takes e4. What's going on? You can take the knight. No, you can't. The knight's pinned to the king. So that's why this bishop's a bit of a pain in the neck. And so what white does in this position, as we've seen before, is just castles, just ignores it, and knight takes, pawn takes, and not bishop takes c3, which we've seen in a different game, and black just gets into all kinds of trouble. That's on the previous video in this playlist if you wanted to see what happens. But black instead decides to retreat back to e7. Why? Well, because he was under attack, he's got to go somewhere, so he's chosen to go to e7. But if you're cannily watching the analysis bar, you'll realize that that's not actually terribly helpful either. So what are we going to do? We're going to attack with the initiative. So white moves forward and gains some space and restricts black's options. And then knight to a5. And here's where things get interesting. A d6. Well, Okay, where's that come from? What's that all about? Why are we doing that? What's that then? Well, let's play the game through and see what happens. So bishop takes and rook to e1. Ah, so the pawn was put here to distract this bishop away to allow the check. Okay, well, fine. Well, black's got to get out of check, and king f8 doesn't look particularly pretty. So we'll put the bishop back in the way. We'll block the check. Why not? Okay. Now, what we know from chess theory is if we have a piece that's pinned, generally speaking, the best thing is to kick it again, is to just keep piling on it. And white knows their theory. So bishop to g5, let's attack it again. So now there's two pieces attacking it and only the queen and king defending. Okay, well, it's not terminal, but it's looking a bit bad, isn't it? +4. Black decides the best thing to do is to block. So he puts a pawn in the way. Okay, fair enough, understandable. Oh, a bishop sacrifice. Ah, right, what's going on here? Well, so you can imagine black going through their mind during the game. What's going on here? So, well, we'll take the bishop, why not? And knight to e5. But that's another piece under attack. Well, it isn't really, because pawn takes. Queen here's check. Oops, no, that's not check. That's me not being able to draw arrows. Queen here's check. The king has to move. And, oh, checkmate, because the queen's supported by the bishop. Yeah. And that's the whole reason for what's going on here. This is just potentially horrid. So, okay, so we had bishop takes and pawn takes and knight to e5. And what was actually played in our game? So h5, that's a clever idea. So blocking the square because the pawn's protected by the rook. So a clever idea. But white wants to get onto this diagonal anyway, so white just plays here. And now is threatening queen to g6. Clever move. So black says, well, I can't have that, so we'll try and defend this square. So black plays rook to h6, so now the queen can't go there. And white, well, okay, we're still going to get on this diagonal. I don't care whether you like it or not. We're going to do this somehow, so white goes queen here. And now the threat is queen to f7 checkmate, because the queen will be defended by the knight. Well, black obviously has to defend h7, so back goes the rook. To defend that way, but unfortunately it's actually checkmate in 3, and I know this to be true because Dr. Dave's written it in their book, and I'm good enough player even at my ripe old age to see it, and just in case it says m3 down here, which is the computer's way of telling us. So let's see how it gets finished off. Queen to g8, so these horrible white squares that were weakened earlier on when this pawn moved, that's the problem with moving the f-pawn. We can dive in and take advantage. The only way to get out of this, because king can't go there, so the only move is to play bishop to f8. And now this rook down here that's on the same line as the king and has been since about move 12 now comes into his own. Knight to c6 is check, but it's not check from the knight, it's check from the rook getting out the way. Black obviously has to do something. There's not much he can do. He can't move the king. He can't move the bishop in the way because the bishop's pinned. He could put the queen in the way, but it's hardly attractive to just put your own queen in danger, and there's probably some sort of checkmate anyway. So what he plays is the only move that's possible. Rook to e7. But now we get this amazing finish. Actually, either is good. Bishop here. Checkmate. What? Well, yeah. I mean, the king can't take the bishop because the queen will take, so the bishop's protected. And you can't play rook takes bishop because it's pinned to the king. So, yeah, absolutely brutal. And what I'm going to do again is just what we've done in the past and just go back a bit and watch the analysis bar to see where on earth it is that black goes wrong, because dead level after knight takes e4. Castles, we're fine. Knight takes, okay, still pretty good. Takes, fine. Bishop e7. Computer not a big fan of that. As soon as it finds d5, starting to say advantage white. Well, okay. Knight to a5. d6. And Bishop takes not the best move. Look at this creeping up. And now all of a sudden the computer's spotted exactly what happens in the game. Rook, check. The bishop has to go back. And yeah, this is nasty. +5 is telling you that black is in all kinds of trouble. And there's actually plenty of really good moves for white. So you could play the computer's giving as a second best move. Bishop takes, king takes, knight e5, check, king to f8, queen to f3, bishop in the way on f6, queen to d5, so threatening mate yet again. Probably bishop takes knight. Yeah, thought so. Rook takes, and we've still got a position where it's not quite as good as the game, but white is still +2.5. Look at the state of the black king. Look at white's pieces in the middle of the board. We've got a dying knight over here. Just horrible. So really good example again of the trouble both players and especially black can get into with these openings. And by the way, in this position, the best thing to do according to the computer is to just accept that the bishop is dead and play d5. So not accept that it's dead necessarily, because you can retreat it later. But d5, the computer thinks is best. So instead of moving your own attacked bishop, attack the white one. And bishop e7 is okay, but that's a slight advantage for white as well. So, okay, fine. Let's go to the next game. I must tick these off as we go, or I will lose track of how many we've done. Done that one. So we've got 2 more to go. And then that will be the end for this particular video. So we've got another one in the Muller attack. So by now, say it along with me. Everyone should know. E4, E5, knight to F3, knight to C6, bishop to C4, bishop to C5, C3, knight F6, D4. And notice the bar is still roughly in the middle. It's a dead level, relatively level game. ED4, CD4, bishop B4 check. We've seen this about half a dozen times at least now. Knight to C3 to block the check. Knight takes, castles, knight takes, pawn takes. And uh-oh, black's going to get greedy. Bishop takes. And the bar has just crept up, and it's a little bit of an advantage to white. Bishop takes, we've seen it before. Queen to b3, so we've put these two on the battery against f7 while attacking the bishop. Uh-oh. Bishop takes d4 this time. Interesting idea. Not very good, as you can see, because it's now suddenly +6. But let's see what happens. Well, not the immediate knight takes. Oh, I've left the lines on, silly me. Should have turned it off. Never mind, doesn't matter. Not the immediate knight takes, which is just not very good. Bishop takes check. Remember, the king can't recapture because the bishop is protected. So the king has to move, king to f8. And now here we go, same move as in a couple of games ago. Bishop to g5 to attack the queen, because remember the knight defends his mate on g5. So how's black going to save their queen? Well, we put something in the way. Bishop to f6 is played, and what happens from white? Well, rook a e1 is played. So this is kind of the sort of thing that's going through white's mind at this point, among other nasty ideas. But black plays knight to e7. And look at the bar go up to +5.8. Now let's see. There's quite a lot of possibilities here. But Dr. Dave gives one little one sequence, and what he gives is bishop h5. So the point of that, why are we retreating? Well, if we replace that bishop with the queen, it's checkmate. So once again, we're creating a threat. And what if you put the knight in the way? Because that cuts off the bishop's support. So knight to g6. Well, knight to e5. We want to distract that knight away. So let's put something in the middle of the board to try and distract it. And knight takes e5. Now, you can't just go queen here, checkmate, because remember the knight's defending that square. So what we have to do instead is now take the knight, and now this threat is a real threat again. So rook takes e5. And so black's got to do something again to defend this square, to block this square. So g6, we've put another piece on g6 to block the attack. And instead, white goes bishop here, check. Ouch. Black has to do something. Well, he can't go to these squares because the queen's on them. And he can't go to these squares, sorry, because the rook's on them. I'll just put back the queen's arrows. And he can't move the king here because obviously the bishop's attacking. So the only thing to do is bishop to g7. And yeah, the next move is quite funny. So rook here, check. You can't play pawn takes rook because that undoes this blocking of this square. So queen here is checkmate. Ouchie. Okay, so let's not play pawn takes rook. Let's move the king again. And we'll put it on e7 because why not? We've got to put it somewhere. And now we bring the other rook into the attack. We'd all forgotten about this one, quietly minding its own business. So check. And the king's got problems now because it can't go this way. It's got to come into the middle of the board. And once it gets there, it's met by the queen with checkmate. And there's not really anything that black can do to save this. It's just dead. I mean, if you get to this position, you can have some fun if you find a computer that does analysis. Once you get to this position, after bishop takes d4, look at the bar just shoot up to the top. It's just not a good move. But bishop f7 is a great example of what can happen if you don't castle, if you neglect your king, leave it in the middle of the board, you will get into all kinds of trouble. But it is worth pointing out once again that until black played the move bishop takes d4, it's actually pretty level. Yeah, at junior level, d5, yeah, okay, it's plus what is it, 0.9 plus 0.8 for y, it's creeping around 1. That's not terminal, that's not game over. So you just be aware, it's not necessarily all one-sided. Okay, we've got one game left here. And this one, I'm just looking at the moves on Dr. Dave's transcript. Looks like it's actually an Evans Gambit. So like I said, I don't know if it's just slipped into the wrong chapter or if there's a transposition going to take place that swaps it back to being a Muller, the Muller Attack, the Giuoco Piano, but whatever, it doesn't matter. It's all for education. So let's have a look. And this was played in Viborg in Denmark in 1996. The 7th NATO Championships, round 3. You've done it again, Dr. Dave. Where do you find it? Right, so here we go. White, e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, as usual. Bishop to c4, bishop to c5, and b4 instead of c3. So this is what I mean. This is the Evans Gambit. And so it seems to be slightly in the wrong chapter, but who cares, because the Evans Gambit is fun. And actually, a lot of the ideas overlap. So you see, we were looking at the Giuoco Piano, which is here and then here. The Evans Gambit is just a way to get to the same thing. So by distracting the bishop, you then can attack it and still play d4, but you've given up a pawn to gain time, to make black waste time taking it. And you have the other advantage that the bishop sometimes can come that way. So whatever, it's all very related stuff, very similar kinds of openings. And the best move for black is just to take it. Okay, just take it. And you can see it's basically level. You know, minus 0.03. I mean, how level do you want it? Let's turn the lines off for a minute anyway. So now c3, because we've gained time against the black bishop. Black's got to move the bishop. And bishop a5 is the best move, I think. You can play it to some other squares, but I do bishop a5. Okay. And white castles, not the immediate d4, because white thinks maybe this pin on this pawn will be annoying. So white castles first. And an interesting move from black next, he goes straight back to b6. So this bishop now has moved once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, has done a nice little dance and made itself a diamond in the corner of the board here. Black's only had 6 moves and 4 of them were by the bishop. So that might be a sign that black is wasting a bit of time. Having said that, the computer's saying it couldn't be any leveler. Computer's saying the chances here are equal. And it is educational, isn't it? White has a whole pawn down on this square that I'm flashing as a missing pawn, and yet the computer still says equal chances. And that's because the king is safe, because white's got more development, white's about to attack in the center, white's about to bring the bishop out, whereas black has still got pieces at home. You're going to have to waste time moving this to get them out. And most importantly, in these kinds of openings, this king is still stuck in the middle. If you're going to play e4, e5 openings, you better get your king to safety quickly. All right, so where did we get to? Move 6, bishop d6, b6, and now white plays d4. Okay, fine. And black's response is d6. Nothing wrong with it. You can see the computer's saying still pretty level. You know, white's given up a pawn, but has got compensation for it. So pawn takes. Okay, fine. And black responds, pawn takes as well. And now white plays this queen b3 move that we've seen a few times, setting up this battery. And there's also potential for the rook to come here and be annoying on the open file, protected by Her Majesty on b3. So queen to b3 is played. And black finds a way to defend this pawn, which is an interesting way to do it, with queen to f6. And nothing wrong with it, obviously. Computer says it's fine. But she might be a bit exposed out there. And so white, rook to d1, well, as predicted, let's attack the open file. And this king, look at this square the rook's attacking right next to this king that's still not castled. Ah, dear. Knight ge7, black is now trying to get their king away from the center of the board and as quickly as possible. White's not going to let them. Bishop g5, here it is again. How many times have we seen this move in this video to gain time against the queen with the bishop defended by the knight? So the queen has to move. We can't be losing our queen worth 9 for a bishop worth 3, so queen to g6. And remember, she's still got to keep defending this square. So everything on both sides of the board's coming together for white here. And white decides at this point they're quite keen on keeping the black king in the middle of the board. So bishop takes here. And it's still perfectly okay. Look, black can defend. Computer saying dead level. And black goes king takes. Absolutely fine. Not a problem. There is a reason why you shouldn't really go knight takes. We'll put the computer back on and do the analysis in a sec. So at the minute, it's still looking a bit odd for black, but let's see. Queen to a3, check. Fine. King goes back to e8. Oh, creeping. Still fine. Bishop to b5. So why? Well, we're just pinning the knight, and that's not actually the best move. Look, the computer's saying that's probably not the best move by white. But just remember, this king is in the middle of the board, and castles now is illegal because the king has already moved. You can't castle. So bishop to d7, black decides to break the pin. So there's now something in the pin, but oh, watch the bar. The bar has just shot up to +6. This really natural move is actually completely losing. What's going on here? Well, rook takes d7. A rook sacrifice. What? Oh, well, king takes. I'm going to take it. And then you have a problem. Check. And attacking the queen. So white is going to win the queen. But knight takes knight isn't possible because the knight is once again pinned. Ouch. So let's put the lines on because I always want to show you that this is not terminal until one player makes a silly mistake. So at this point, computer's saying black's okay. Slight advantage to black in spite of only being a pawn up, only a slight advantage. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Rook to d1. Computer saying here it quite likes black. -1. Knight g7. Uh-oh. That's not a good move. Look, it's now back to level. Bishop to g5. Queen to g6. All fine. Bishop takes. Okay, still all level. King takes. By the way, we can't be doing that in this position because knight takes here, attacking the queen, and then you've got a third piece on this square is just horrible, if anyone was wondering. So what do we got? King takes was played. Okay, fine. Queen to a3. It's still all okay for black. Watch the bar when black makes a mistake. King back. Okay, fine. Not the best move, bishop there. It's okay. Bishop blocks the pin. Uh-oh, there it goes. Absolutely incredible. The most natural looking move in the world to block the pin, develop your bishop, and it gets squished. Rook takes, and there's nothing you can do. If you don't take the rook, if you just ignore it, well, you're just going to be material down anyway. So king takes, knight takes, and it's toast because check there, and the knight is pinned. So there's nothing black can do to save their queen. Amazing stuff. Really, really exciting opening. Will lead to some very, very quick wins for both players. But again, I'll stress it a million times in every video. If both players play sensible moves and play accurately, it's actually pretty level. It's just quite a wild ride getting there. So, okay, that concludes Dr. Dave's chapter on the Giuoco Piano and the Muller Attack. And in the next video, when we get there, we will come to an opening called The Two Knights. And The Two Knights is something like this. And I wonder why it's called the Two Knights variation. Well, maybe it's because black plays both knights out first. But we'll worry about that another time. See you all soon. Hope that was useful.